The sun had just begun to rise over the horizon, casting its golden glow across the crystal-clear waters of the tropical beach. The gentle waves lapped against the shore, their rhythm calming and steady, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. As she stood at the edge of the beach, barefoot in the soft sand, the air smelled of salt and freedom. This was supposed to be the perfect honeymoon, the culmination of all their dreams. The man she had married just days ago, the man she had fallen in love with despite his wealth and status, was standing beside her. They had everything: youth, love, and a lifetime ahead of them. But as she turned to face him, the smile on her lips faltered, and her heart skipped a beat. In his hand, he held something. A piece of paper, his eyes serious, almost like he was about to make an announcement that would change everything. She glanced down at it, confused. "What's this?" she asked, her voice betraying the unease that had settled in her chest. He smiled softly, his eyes twinkling with a secret only he knew. "I want to give you something. Something that will prove how much I trust you." The words hung in the air like a promise, but her gut twisted. She had no idea what was coming. He extended his hand, passing the paper to her. She took it, her fingers brushing against his as she unfolded the document. The first line sent a shock through her body, her mind struggling to process what she was reading. It was a legal contract, and in bold letters at the top, it read, "Transfer of ownership of all assets." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked up at him, eyes wide with disbelief. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He met her gaze with that calm, unwavering expression that had always made her feel safe. But now, it sent a chill down her spine. "It's all yours," he said quietly. "My company, my house, everything I own, it's yours." The world seemed to spin around her as she tried to make sense of his words. This wasn't just a gift. It was everything he had built, everything he had worked for. His wealth, his empire, his entire life's work. And now, it was hers. "Why?" she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. She couldn't understand. She had never asked for his fortune. She had never cared about his money. He had promised her a life of love, of companionship, not riches. And yet, here he was, offering her everything. "Because I love you," he replied, his tone steady and sincere. "But it's more than that. It's because I need you to know that I trust you. This is me, giving you my everything. You asked for nothing, and yet, you've given me everything. I want to make sure you never doubt that." She looked at him, her heart racing in her chest. Love? Trust? Was this truly about those things? Or was it something else? She didn't know what to feel. She had always been taught that love wasn't about possessions, about wealth, or about things. It was about connection, about vulnerability, about the bond that was formed between two people when they truly saw each other for who they were. But this felt different. It felt like a test. Was this really a gesture of love, or was it a way for him to hold something over her? To prove something to himself about her? She looked down at the document again, her eyes scanning the words, feeling as though they were closing in on her, suffocating her. His fortune, everything that had once been his, was now hers. It felt like too much responsibility, too much weight. How could she handle it? How could she possibly accept it when she wasn't sure if her love for him was enough to carry such a heavy burden? "I don't know if I can accept this," she said quietly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. She had no idea how to respond. The love they shared was pure, but now, with this monumental gesture, she felt lost. "You don't have to," he replied, his voice gentle. "But I want you to understand something. This isn't just about the money. This is about me trusting you completely. I want you to have everything, because I know you'll never take it for granted." His words hung in the air, but they didn't bring her the peace she thought they might. Instead, they only brought more questions. Why had he done this? What was he trying to prove? And most importantly, why did it feel like this gift came with strings attached? She couldn't help but wonder if this was just another way to test her, to see if she would prove her love for him by accepting everything he was willing to give. But why did it have to be this way? Why couldn't they just love each other without this grand gesture, without this heavy expectation? She looked at him, her mind racing, her emotions swirling. She wanted to trust him, to believe that this was a simple act of love. But something inside her told her that there was more to this than met the eye. She wasn't sure what it was, but the feeling in her gut told her that this honeymoon, this moment that was supposed to be perfect, was about to unravel everything she thought she knew about their relationship. "I love you," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "But I need you to understand something too. I didn't marry you for your money. I married you because of who you are, because of how you make me feel, because of the life we've built together. I don't need your fortune to prove that." He reached out, taking her hand in his thumb gently brushing across her skin. "I know," he said quietly. "And that's why I'm giving this to you. Because I know you would never take it for the wrong reasons. But I need to know that we're building something real. That this isn't about me or what I can give you. That this is about us. That our love is enough, without anything else." She looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never wanted his wealth, never cared about his success. All she wanted was him, just as he was. But now, with this gesture, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The honeymoon they had imagined, the carefree days spent enjoying each other's company, had been replaced by an emotional whirlwind that left her questioning everything. Could their love withstand the weight of this fortune? Could they move forward without it changing everything they had built? She didn't know, but she knew one thing for sure. This honeymoon would be like no other. Their story began in the most unexpected of places, a tiny coffee shop in the heart of the city. She had never been one to believe in love at first sight, but that day, as she sat across from him at a small wooden table, something felt different. He wasn't like the men she'd known before, men who were charming and polished, who wore expensive suits and had the world at their feet. No, he was different. His clothes were simple, a button-up shirt tucked into a pair of worn jeans. His shoes weren't designer, and he didn't flash expensive watches or flashy accessories. But there was something about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, that drew her in. He was genuine. No pretenses, no games, just an honesty that shone through in every word he spoke. She had always been skeptical of wealthy men, of those who flaunted their success, who seemed to believe their money could buy them everything, including love. She had learned from her past relationships that wealth didn't guarantee happiness, and it certainly didn't guarantee love. But with him, it felt different. There were no strings attached, no hidden agendas. He wasn't trying to impress her with his wealth, he was simply trying to get to know her. As they spent more time together, she learned that his wealth, although impressive, wasn't what defined him. He didn't talk about it much, and when he did, it was never with pride or boastfulness. He spoke about his work with a sense of duty, of responsibility, as if he was doing what he loved, not for the money, but because it was something that fulfilled him. He had inherited his fortune from his father, a successful businessman, but unlike others she had known, he didn't seem to care much about the material trappings of his success. He didn't flaunt it, didn't let it define him, and certainly didn't try to use it to manipulate others. What drew her to him the most was his ability to see beyond the surface, to look beyond the material wealth and see the person. He saw her, not as someone who had to prove herself, not as someone looking for a free ride, but as a woman with dreams, ambitions, and fears. He listened to her, really listened, and he made her feel heard, something she had never truly experienced before. In return, she showed him a side of life he had never truly known. Her family wasn't wealthy by any means, but they were rich in love, in connection, and in simple joys. They spent evenings together, sitting around the dinner table, talking about everything and nothing. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people learning about each other, enjoying each other's company. He had never experienced this before, and it brought a sense of warmth into his life that no amount of money could ever provide. It wasn't long before they fell in love. And despite the vast difference in their financial situations, the bond they shared was genuine. Their relationship wasn't built on material things. It was built on something deeper, something far more enduring: trust. She never asked him for anything. She didn't want his money or his luxury lifestyle. She wanted him, just as he was. And in return, he offered her everything he had: his heart, his soul, and his trust. But as time went on, the weight of his family's expectations began to creep into their lives. His family, his father in particular, had always seen him as the heir to the family fortune, the one who would carry on the legacy of wealth and power. His father often hinted at the pressure he felt to marry someone from a certain background, someone who could help elevate the family's name and status. But he wasn't interested in that. He wasn't interested in wealth or status, or a woman who saw him as a stepping stone to a better life. He wanted a partner, someone who would stand by him, not because of his money, but because of who he was. But as they got more serious, the reality of their situation began to set in. Her family, though kind and loving, wasn't part of the elite circles his family moved in. They had a modest lifestyle, with no interest in high society, and no desire to rub shoulders with the wealthy elite. They were content with their simple life. And while he appreciated this, he knew his family would never accept it. They had their eyes set on a woman who could bring them prestige, someone with a name that carried weight in the business world. Despite this, he made it clear to his family that his heart belonged to her. He had no interest in marrying for status, for money, or family approval. He wanted her, and he would fight for their love. But that fight was harder than he had anticipated. His family pushed back, trying to convince him that love couldn't stand up to the pressures of wealth and legacy. They didn't understand why he would choose her, someone from a humble background, over a woman who could provide him with connections and advantages. They saw her as a distraction, an obstacle to his success. But he never wavered. He loved her, and that was enough. He didn't need her to be anyone else but herself. She was everything he had ever wanted: kind, compassionate, strong, and fiercely independent. And that was the woman he was going to marry, regardless of what anyone else thought. When he proposed to her, it wasn't with grand gestures or elaborate rings. It was simple, heartfelt, and sincere. He didn't need to prove anything to her or anyone else. He simply wanted to spend his life with her. He wanted to build something real, something grounded in love, not wealth. And when she said yes, he knew that their love was worth fighting for. But the reality of their situation still weighed heavily on them. He knew that one day, they would have to face his family's expectations again. And when that day came, he wondered if their love would be enough to withstand the pressure. Would she still be able to see him for who he was? Not just as the heir to a fortune, but as the man who loved her deeply? And would his family ever accept her? Or would they forever see her as the woman who didn't belong in their world? Despite the uncertainty that loomed ahead, one thing was clear. Their love wasn't built on money or status. It was built on trust, on a connection that went beyond material things. And that was something no amount of wealth could ever take away. As their relationship deepened, the undercurrent of class conflict began to show itself in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. They loved each other deeply, but the chasm between their worlds, his world of wealth and privilege, and her world of simplicity and hard work, was undeniable. While they were both determined to make their love work, the differences in their social standing began to create moments of tension. He had grown up in a world where money was never a problem. His father had built an empire, and as the heir, he was expected to follow in his footsteps, taking over the reins of the family business. Everything in his life had been planned for him. His education, his career path, and even his social circle. He attended elite schools, lived in luxury, and mingled with the rich and powerful. His friends were successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, and high-profile individuals, people who played the game of wealth and status with ease. But none of that mattered to him. What mattered was her. The woman who didn't care about his fortune. The woman who saw him for the person he truly was, not for the money he represented. She had grown up in a modest household where family values and love were the true wealth. Her life had been shaped by hard work and perseverance. She had seen her parents struggle to make ends meet, but through it all, they had loved each other unconditionally. Her own career was built from the ground up, and she had learned to be independent, relying on her own skills and determination rather than anyone else's resources. At first, their love had felt like a beautiful escape, a chance to step outside the constraints of their respective worlds. She had never felt out of place in his presence. In fact, it was the first time she had felt truly seen, accepted for who she was, not for what she had or didn't have. He had made her feel valued for her heart, her mind, and her soul. And in return, she had brought a sense of warmth, simplicity, and joy to his often cold, materialistic world. But as time went on, their different worlds began to clash in ways they hadn't anticipated. At first, it was small things. The way his friends would look at her when she didn't know the right etiquette for a formal dinner, or the way his family would make veiled comments about her lack of high society knowledge. They didn't mean to be rude, but there was always an invisible wall between her and them. She wasn't part of their world, and they weren't shy about letting her know that. On the other side, her world also began to intrude on their relationship. She had always prided herself on being independent, on not relying on anyone else. But in his world, that independence sometimes felt like an obstacle. When she turned down his offers of financial support, whether it was for a vacation or a business venture, he didn't understand. To him, money was just a tool to make life easier, a way to support the people you loved. But to her, accepting that kind of help felt like losing a part of herself, like betraying the very values that had shaped her. The tension reached its peak when they attended a high-profile charity gala together. She had agreed to go, mostly to show her support for him, but she had never felt more out of place. The room was filled with the wealthiest and most powerful people in the city, all dressed in their finest, talking about investments, acquisitions, and exclusivity. She felt like an outsider, a fish out of water, surrounded by people whose lives were worlds apart from hers. He could sense her discomfort, and while he tried to make her feel at ease, he couldn't help but notice the subtle disapproval from his family and friends. His mother raised an eyebrow when she didn't know how to greet people with the right amount of formality. His best friend whispered something about her lack of polish. And his father, who had always been a stickler for appearances, seemed unimpressed by her simple, understated dress instead of the extravagant couture the others were wearing. She, in turn, was uncomfortable with the whole atmosphere. The forced smiles, the pretentious conversations, and the constant display of wealth. It felt so shallow to her, and she couldn't help but feel out of place. She had grown up in a world where people valued honesty, connection, and hard work, not power, money, and influence. As much as she loved him, she couldn't ignore the fact that his world was suffocating her, making her feel like she didn't belong. She also began to realize that their worlds were more than just different. They were fundamentally at odds. He had been raised to believe that wealth and status were the keys to success, that they opened doors and provided security. She had been raised to believe that true happiness came from love, hard work, and meaningful connections, not from the size of your bank account or the label on your clothes. Despite the love they shared, the growing divide between their worlds began to feel insurmountable. Every time they argued about something, whether it was his family's expectations or her reluctance to accept his financial help, it felt like the differences in their social status were being magnified. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about identity. He didn't want to lose the woman he loved, But he also didn't want to give up the world he had always known. She didn't want to change who she was to fit into his world, but she also didn't want to lose him. The conflict reached a breaking point when he asked her to move into his family's estate. He offered her the chance to live in luxury, to experience the world he had been born into. But for her, it felt like a trap. It wasn't just about the house. It was about everything the house represented: his family's expectations, their lifestyle, and their values. She had always been proud of her independence, and this offer felt like it would strip her of that. For the first time, she questioned whether their love could truly survive. Could two people from such different worlds ever make it work? Could love overcome the barriers of class and privilege? As much as she wanted to believe in their love, she couldn't ignore the reality that their worlds were simply too different. But he wasn't ready to give up. He loved her with everything he had, and he wasn't about to let class differences destroy what they had built together. He knew their love was real, but he also knew that they had to face the challenges of their respective worlds if they wanted to make it work. As the days went on, both of them realized that love alone wouldn't be enough to bridge the gap between their two worlds. But they were willing to try. They would have to navigate the pressures of wealth, family expectations, and their own fears if they wanted to make it work. But no matter what happened, one thing was clear: their love was real, and that was worth fighting for. As the days of their honeymoon passed, a dark realization began to set in. The beautiful world they had imagined together seemed to be unraveling at an alarming speed. At first, everything felt perfect: the sun-soaked beaches, the quiet moments shared under the stars, and the feeling of their hearts finally aligning after years of waiting. But as they settled into their romantic getaway, there were moments of unease that both of them tried to ignore. He had always been open about his family's wealth and his responsibilities, but something was unsettling about the way he acted around money during their honeymoon. It wasn't just the lavish gifts and expensive dinners. It was the way he kept bringing up the topic of business, the mention of the family legacy, and his incessant talk about how important it was for him to secure his fortune. His intentions became murky when one night, after a few too many drinks, he casually mentioned that he would be signing over everything to her soon, a statement that left her speechless. As the hours went by, she began to question whether his gesture of signing over the fortune to her was really about love, or if it was a mere transaction, an exchange that might tie her to him in ways she hadn't anticipated. When she pressed him about it, asking if it was truly a gift of love, he gave an ambiguous answer that left her with more doubts than before. He claimed that the act was part of their commitment to one another, a way of showing that they would never let money come between them. But there was something hollow in his words, something that made her wonder if the truth was far more complicated. That night, as they lay together in silence, the weight of his words lingered in the air, suffocating their intimacy. The question gnawed at her. Had he given her the fortune out of love? Or was this just another way to secure his legacy and ensure that she remained tied to him? A strategic move disguised as romance? The truth, she feared, was that the fortune was never about love at all. It was always about control, about power, and about his need to protect his empire. The revelation stung harder than anything else. Love had been a part of their relationship, but his wealth had always been a tool in the background, an asset that, knowingly or unknowingly, had placed her in a position where she couldn't escape, where she couldn't leave without facing the consequences of the deal they had struck. And as she sat there, grappling with this realization, she realized that the honeymoon they had dreamt of had quickly turned into a trap. The idea of a perfect love-filled marriage was being overshadowed by the fear that love was not the most important thing in his life after all. What she had hoped would be a shared future built on trust and affection now felt like an entanglement of power, money, and expectations. The fortune he had signed over to her might have been a symbol of commitment, but deep down, she began to wonder if it was more of a subtle reminder of the control he still wielded, a power he would never let go of, no matter how deeply they cared for each other. The truth hurt because it shattered the fairy tale she had envisioned. She had always believed that love was enough and could conquer any obstacle. But the reality was clear. Love wasn't enough to change the fact that their lives had been built on the foundation of wealth, status, and social expectations. And now, with the fortune in her hands, she was left with a question that loomed larger than any romantic gesture. Would she ever be free to love him without the weight of his money, legacy, and empire? Would she ever truly be able to escape the suffocating influence of the fortune that wasn't about love at all, but about everything else? The tension in their relationship grew as the reality of their situation began to sink in. The honeymoon had ended, and the fairy tale world they had shared began to fall apart piece by piece. She was left to grapple with the enormity of the situation, his wealth, the empire he had built, and the position she now found herself in. At first, she had been swept up in the dream, believing that love would somehow overpower everything else. But now, the weight of his fortune felt like an anchor, holding her back from truly being herself and testing the very foundation of their bond. She began to feel the pressure not just from the money, but from the expectations that came with it. He had handed over the fortune, but it felt less like a gift and more like a challenge. It was as though he was silently daring her to prove herself worthy of it, to show that she was more than just a pretty face, more than just the woman who had caught his eye. He wanted to see if she could thrive in his world, to prove that she was not just there for his wealth, but for him, as a partner who could stand on her own. The question she faced was simple. Could she? Could she truly prove her worth in a world where his name was everything and her own identity had been overshadowed by the money that surrounded them? She decided to take matters into her own hands. She stopped relying on his connections, his influence, and his wealth. She began to forge her own path, diving into business ventures and projects that excited her. She took every opportunity to prove that she wasn't just the wife of a wealthy man. She was a woman with ambitions, dreams, and a mind of her own. She attended meetings on her own, negotiated deals, and made her own contacts, determined to carve out a space for herself that was independent of his shadow. This was her journey of self-discovery, a path that took her through moments of self-doubt, struggle, and frustration. But with each step she took, she found a new sense of strength. She no longer felt like she was living in the periphery of his world. She was becoming someone who could stand beside him as an equal, not just in the eyes of the world, but in her own heart. Her emotional growth was undeniable. As she faced each challenge, she realized that her worth was never tied to the fortune he had given her, but to her ability to create her own success. She began to understand that love wasn't about being dependent on one another's wealth or status. It was about supporting each other's dreams and ambitions. Her emotional transformation came from within, as she recognized that she had everything she needed to be successful and valued, not because of the money or the title she held, but because of who she was as a person. She proved to herself that she didn't need his money to define her worth. She wasn't just a woman with a fortune. She was a woman with strength, independence, and a heart that could love without the constraints of materialism. Her relationship with him began to shift as she grew more confident in her own abilities, and it became clear that the more she found herself, the stronger their bond became. This was no longer just about her proving herself to him. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of achieving anything, with or without him. The power play between them slowly transformed into something more balanced, where they supported each other as partners rather than two people vying for control. She wasn't defined by his wealth, but by her own journey, her own worth, and the love they shared that was now based on mutual respect and understanding. In the end, she had proven her worth, not just to him, but to herself. She had proven that love was not about possessions or titles, but about the ability to grow, to evolve, and to stand side by side as equals, no matter what the world threw their way. And as she stood tall in her own success, their relationship became more than just a power play. It became a true partnership, built on love, trust, and the recognition of each other's individual strengths. As the days passed, the tension in their marriage deepened, the weight of the fortune he had handed over to her becoming an ever-present obstacle between them. She had initially embraced it, believing that it symbolized his love for her, but as time went on, it began to feel more like a chain than a gift. The life they were living, the world of luxury, the parties, and the endless attention from the media. It all seemed to overshadow the simple love they had once shared. She began to question if his generosity had been motivated by love or by the desire to control her, to test her, to ensure that she would never leave him. His wealth had been his identity, and now it felt like he was trying to impose that identity onto her, expecting her to find fulfillment in it. She rejected the notion that her value was tied to the money he had given her. It felt as though everything she did was overshadowed by the expectation that she should be grateful, that she should be content. She wasn't just a wife. She was the symbol of his success, the trophy on his arm, the woman who had everything. But she had never asked for all of this. She had married him because of the love they shared, not for the fortune he could offer her. And now, with every passing day, she felt more like a prisoner of that very fortune. One evening, after a long day of public events and business meetings, they sat together in their grand estate, the soft hum of the night filling the silence between them. He looked at her, his face a mask of concern, as he reached for her hand. "You seem distant lately," he said, his voice laced with worry. "Is something wrong?" She hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision that had been brewing in her mind for weeks. She had tried to ignore it, to bury it under the glossy surface of their luxurious life, but she couldn't anymore. She knew that if she didn't speak up now, the distance between them would only grow. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't live like this. I didn't marry you for this fortune, and I can't keep pretending that it's what I want." His eyes widened in shock, and for a moment there was silence between them. He had always known she was strong, independent, but he had never imagined that she would reject everything he had given her. The money, the mansion, the lifestyle. It had all been a reflection of his love for her. And now, she was telling him that it meant nothing. He stood up abruptly, his mind racing. "Are you saying you want to leave? That you can't be happy with me? With everything I've given you?" His voice cracked, the vulnerability in his words surprising even himself. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm not leaving you," she said softly, standing to face him. "But I can't be with you if all I am is a reflection of your wealth. I need to find myself again, to feel like I matter for who I am, not for what I have." The words hung in the air, each one striking him like a blow to the chest. He felt a surge of panic. He had feared this day would come, the day she would realize that their love was becoming something else, something tainted by the very thing he had hoped would bring them closer. The money had always been a part of his life, his identity, and he had shared it with her, believing it would make her happy. But now it felt like it was the thing driving a wedge between them. He reached out for her, his voice desperate. "Please don't do this. Don't walk away from everything we've built. We have everything. We can have the world." His words were pleading, but she could see the underlying fear in his eyes. The fear of losing her, of not being enough, of everything he had worked for slipping through his fingers. She took a deep breath, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she was making. "I don't need the world. I need you. But I need to find myself first. I can't do that while living in a world that doesn't feel real anymore." The silence that followed was suffocating. He stood there, frozen, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what she was saying. She was rejecting his fortune, his legacy, everything he had worked for, all in the name of love. But what was left of their love if it was built on a foundation of money and status? The day had come, the moment that he had feared deep down for so long, when she uttered the words that would shatter the delicate world they had built together. It started out as a normal morning, with the sun shining through the windows of their lavish mansion. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. He noticed it in her eyes, the way she seemed distant even as they sat across from each other at breakfast, the silence that had settled in between them. For weeks now, she had been pulling away, becoming more and more disconnected from him. It was as if the weight of his fortune had become a burden she could no longer carry. And no matter how much he tried to reassure her, nothing seemed to make a difference. Finally, as he reached for her hand, his voice soft, he asked the question that had been haunting him. "What's going on? You've been so quiet lately, are you okay?" She stared at him for a moment, her eyes filled with a sadness that pierced his heart. She took a deep breath, hesitated for a moment, and then, as if everything she had been holding in had finally spilled over, she spoke the words that changed everything. "I think it's time for me to leave." His world tilted, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. "What?" he choked out, feeling a sharp pain in his chest. He had been expecting this, had feared it, but hearing her say it aloud felt like an unbearable blow. "I can't do this anymore," she continued, her voice trembling. "I can't be part of this world. It's suffocating me. I don't know who I am anymore. I'm lost in all of this luxury, this facade. I don't want it." Her words hit him like a ton of bricks, and for the first time in their relationship, he felt completely powerless. This wasn't the woman he had married, the woman who had loved him when he had nothing. He had seen the way she had embraced their life together, the way she had stepped into the role of his partner, his equal. But somewhere along the way, things had gone wrong. She had lost herself, and now she was telling him that she was walking away. "You can't leave," he whispered, almost pleading, as panic began to rise in his chest. "You're everything to me. I've given you everything because I love you. I thought this would make you happy. I thought this would be enough." But his words were met with a painful silence. She shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "It's not enough. It never was. I don't want a life built on wealth, on status, on something that's not real. I want a life where I'm valued for who I am, not for what I have." He stood up from the table, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had tried so hard to give her everything she ever wanted, to make her happy. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of what really mattered. He had thought that money and success would solve everything, that it would make her love him more, that it would secure their future. But now, in the face of her words, he realized how wrong he had been. "Please don't leave," he begged, his voice breaking. "You don't have to leave. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't walk away." She stood up, her eyes filled with both pain and determination. "I'm not walking away from you," she said softly. "I'm walking away from this life. I'm walking away from the things that made me forget who I really am. And I'm walking away from pretending that everything is perfect when it's not." He reached for her, his heart racing, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "I need to find myself again. I need to be free of this world to rediscover the woman I used to be before all of this. I don't want to be your trophy anymore. I want to be me." The finality of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just rejecting his wealth. She was rejecting him, rejecting everything he had tried to give her. The life he had worked so hard to create for them was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He felt a deep sense of loss, a sense of grief that he couldn't explain. He had been so focused on giving her everything he thought she wanted that he had forgotten the most important thing: her happiness. "I love you," he whispered, his voice raw. "I love you more than anything. Please don't leave me." But she didn't answer. She simply turned and walked toward the door, leaving him standing there, powerless, watching her leave with the one thing he couldn't give her: the freedom to be herself. The days following her decision to leave were the hardest of his life. Each moment felt like an eternity. He spent his nights pacing the halls of their grand house, haunted by the memory of her departure. She had said it was for herself, that she needed to rediscover who she was outside the bubble of wealth and luxury that had once felt like a dream. Yet, despite knowing the reasons, he couldn't shake the feeling of abandonment. He had given her everything: his fortune, his name, his love. What more could she want? And then there was the realization that hit him like a tidal wave: that she had walked away, Not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him enough to want to be true to herself. For the first time in their relationship, he felt powerless. She had chosen herself over the life they had built together, and in doing so, she had done something that no one had ever done before. She had set herself free. As the days turned into weeks, he tried to reach out to her. He sent flowers, gifts, even letters that expressed how much he missed her, how much he needed her. But every attempt to bring her back only made her more distant. Each conversation ended with her saying, "I'm still finding my way." And he realized that no matter how much he loved her, he couldn't force her to come back. The love they shared had been built on a foundation of trust. But now, trust meant allowing her to find herself again. He knew that he had to let go. The realization came slowly, like a gentle wave washing over him. Letting go wasn't just about accepting her decision. It was about accepting the truth that love, real love, wasn't about possession or control. It was about giving the other person the space to grow, to find their path, even if that path led them away from him. And so, for the first time, he made the hardest decision of his life. He stopped calling. He stopped sending messages. He stopped trying to fill the space in their home with his desperation. He had to let her go. But letting go didn't mean he stopped loving her. It meant that he finally understood that her happiness didn't have to come from being with him. He had spent so much of his life trying to build an empire, to offer her everything he thought she wanted. But he now saw that the true value of their relationship wasn't in the material things. It was in the love they had shared, in the trust they had built. He had been clinging to the idea of her, clinging to the notion that the life they had was perfect. But in reality, he had been holding on too tightly. And in doing so, he had made her feel suffocated, trapped in a life she hadn't chosen for herself. Now, he saw it. His love for her wasn't about making her stay. It was about supporting her decision, respecting her need for independence. She needed to know that she was loved for who she was, not for what she could give him. As the days passed, he began to let go of his resentment, his frustration, and his need for validation. He focused on himself, on rediscovering who he was outside of his wealth and the image of the perfect husband. He spent time reflecting on the lessons he had learned, about love, about sacrifice, and the importance of being true to oneself. It was in these moments of solitude that he began to heal, to come to terms with the fact that life was never meant to be perfect. It was messy, unpredictable, and full of challenges. But in letting go, he had opened the door for the possibility of something more meaningful, something that wasn't built on money, status, or appearances. It was built on mutual respect, trust, and the freedom to love without expectations. And for the first time in his life, he felt at peace. He no longer wanted to change her or make her fit into his world. He wanted her to be herself, whether she was with him or not. As he sat in the quiet of their home, he smiled softly to himself. Letting go was the hardest thing he had ever done, but it was also the most freeing. It was the only way forward, and maybe, just maybe, it was the only way to truly love her. After weeks of solitude, reflection, and the emotional distance she had created from the world she once knew, she began to see things differently. At first, her life had been a whirlwind of luxury, parties, and public admiration. She had lived a life that many could only dream of, with a man who offered her everything she could have ever wanted. Yet, deep down, something had always felt like it was missing. She had been so caught up in the idea of love and the comfort of wealth that she had forgotten to ask herself the most important question: who was she without it all? The time apart gave her the space to answer that question. She had initially thought that her life with him was the culmination of everything she had worked for, that this love, this opulence, was the peak of happiness. But as the weeks passed without him, she began to realize something profound. She had never really known herself. She had lived in his shadow, not in a negative way, but in a way that had allowed her to forget the woman she used to be. The woman was independent, ambitious, and determined. It wasn't just about rejecting the fortune or the luxury she had once enjoyed. It was about finding her voice and her power, something that had been slowly eroded by the life they had built together. The absence of him, the space he had given her to rediscover herself, opened her eyes to the strength she had always carried within. She was more than just a pretty face on his arm or the perfect wife. She had been someone before him, someone with dreams, talents, and desires that were not tied to wealth or status. Slowly, she began to reconnect with her passions. She enrolled in courses she had always dreamed of taking, something she had put off in the past due to her focus on the life they had built together. She started a project that was her own, one that didn't require validation or approval from anyone, not even him. She could feel herself coming alive again in ways she hadn't realized she had missed. As her confidence grew, she began to see her worth in a new light. The strength she had gained wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. She felt more vibrant, more capable, and more like herself than she had in years. She realized that her power wasn't just in being part of a successful marriage, or in being the object of affection of a wealthy man. Her power was in her ability to stand on her own, to forge her path, and to recognize that love didn't define who she was. It enhanced who she already was. Her self-worth was not dependent on someone else's approval, especially not his. With each passing day, she became less concerned with proving herself to anyone. She no longer felt the need to maintain the appearance of perfection, to play a role that wasn't truly hers. The more she embraced who she truly was, the more she realized the depth of her power. She didn't need to be defined by anyone else's expectations, especially not by the man who had given her everything. The moment she realized her worth was the moment she knew that the world was hers to conquer, with or without him. And with this newfound strength, she began to feel truly free. Free to pursue her dreams, free to be the woman she was meant to be, and free to choose what her future would look like. Her journey of self-discovery had just begun, but the foundation had been set. She was no longer the woman who had relied on someone else for her identity. She had found herself again, and nothing could take that away. The journey to rebuild trust wasn't going to be easy for either of them. They had both been through so much: pain, regret, and missed opportunities. She had walked away from him, not because she didn't love him, but because she needed to love herself first. The fortune he had signed over to her, which initially seemed like a grand gesture, now felt like a symbol of the control he had always wanted over their relationship. It was in this space of self-realization that she began to understand that love couldn't be built on material things or grand gestures alone. It was in the small, everyday moments of understanding, respect, and shared experiences. When he realized the depth of her transformation, he understood that winning her back wouldn't be about buying her expensive gifts or giving her more of what she had already rejected. It had to be something deeper, something real. She had grown so much during their time apart. She had learned to stand on her own, to find her voice and worth. Now, he had to show her that he was ready to support her journey, not control it. He started by acknowledging his mistakes. He apologized not for the things she had already known, but for the way he had treated her as an accessory to his world, rather than as an equal partner. He apologized for trying to define their relationship by wealth and status, when the true value of love was in the heart, trust, and mutual respect. It wasn't an easy apology to give, but it was necessary. He understood that trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. It had to be earned, bit by bit, through consistency and genuine change. As they began to talk, to share their thoughts and fears, she started to see the man she had once fallen in love with. He wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But he was willing to put in the effort to show her that he valued her, not for her beauty or her status, but for who she truly was. Slowly, they began to rebuild their connection. It wasn't through grand gestures, but through the little things. Supporting her dreams, giving her space when she needed it, and respecting the person she had become. But this process of redemption wasn't just about his actions. It was about hers as well. She had to learn to forgive him, not for his mistakes, but for the expectations she had placed on their relationship. She had wanted him to be perfect, and in doing so, she had overlooked his flaws. She had to learn to accept him as he was, and to recognize that love was about growth and change, not perfection. They started over, in a sense, but it was with a new understanding of what their love truly meant. He proved his commitment to their future by supporting her independence, rather than trying to pull her back into a life she had already left behind. He didn't want to control her. He wanted to be her partner. With time, the walls between them began to come down. They learned to communicate openly, to express their needs, and to be vulnerable with each other. They no longer saw each other through the lens of what they had been, but as two people ready to create a future that was built on trust, respect, and love. This process wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when they both wondered if they were truly ready to take that final step. But through every trial, they learned more about each other and themselves. The more they worked through their issues, the more they realized that their love wasn't just about chemistry or attraction. It was about partnership, shared dreams, and mutual respect. The journey of rebuilding trust wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Through it all, they learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about supporting each other through the messiness of life and choosing to show up for each other, even when it was hard. By the time they reached the final step of their redemption arc, they knew they had both changed, and that change was a beautiful thing. The foundation of their relationship was now stronger than ever, built on trust, understanding, and a deep, unconditional love. They had truly rebuilt something worth fighting for. Just when things had begun to find balance, just when trust had started to bloom again like a fragile flower after a harsh winter, she did something unexpected. Something that shook him to his core and shifted the emotional weight of their journey. He had spent weeks trying to prove his growth, his commitment, and his transformation. But it was her silent, selfless gesture that truly turned the tide. It started on a quiet morning, the sun filtering through their modest countryside retreat, a place they had chosen together to get away from the world and its distractions. She had been waking up early every day, earlier than him, slipping out of bed and vanishing for hours. He noticed her absence but didn't question it. He wanted to respect her space, trusting that whatever she was doing was hers alone to share when she was ready. Then, one day, she invited him on a walk. Not just any walk, but a walk down a quiet trail near a hilltop. At first, it seemed ordinary, the air crisp and the path familiar. But as they reached the top, what he saw made his heart pause. There, on the hillside, was a small wooden bench. Not just any bench, but one hand-carved with his late mother's name engraved on the backrest. Surrounding it were freshly planted flowers, her favorites, tulips and daisies, small wildflowers too, the ones that had always made his mother smile. He stepped closer, his throat tightening as he realized what this was. She had created a memorial garden. She had never met his mother, but she had listened, remembered every story, every cherished detail, and transformed it into something real, something sacred, a place of remembrance, peace, and love. His knees buckled slightly, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming emotion crashing through him. "You did this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. She simply nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "You always spoke of her like she was your heart," she said softly. "I wanted to honor that part of you. Not with money or gifts, but with love." He couldn't speak. He just stared at her, realizing that no grand gesture he had made, not even signing over his entire fortune, could ever match what she had just given him. Because this wasn't about wealth. This wasn't about proving worth. This was about seeing someone's soul and choosing to care for it. This was a gesture that couldn't be bought, a love that couldn't be faked. And in that moment, he understood something deeper than ever before. She loved him with a depth he had never even believed he deserved. That realization struck him like lightning. All his life, people had shown up for his money, for the lifestyle, for the status. But here she was, honoring his past, healing his heart, and expecting nothing in return. As they sat together on that bench, the wind dancing through the flowers, a quietness settled between them, a quietness that didn't need to be filled. Because sometimes, silence carries more love than 1,000 words. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, he felt whole. This wasn't just a heartfelt gesture. It was a turning point. It was her way of saying, I see you, all of you, and I choose you still. This mini twist didn't come with dramatic music or public applause. It came gently, like a whisper in the wind, yet it held the power to heal every scar they had carried. And he knew, in that moment, that he would never let her go again, not for anything in the world. He thought he had learned everything about love the day he signed over his entire fortune to her during their honeymoon, believing that surrendering his wealth was the ultimate act of trust. But love, as life would soon prove, is far more complicated than just grand gestures or symbolic sacrifices. It began with an unexpected letter delivered not to him, but to her. A legal document, stamped and formal, declaring that the board of his company had found a loophole in the transfer of assets. Because the fortune had been given during an emotional moment and under no formal prenup agreement, some of the company's stakeholders had initiated a quiet legal challenge to regain control of his estate. It was messy, complicated, and rooted in greed, not justice. She didn't tell him at first. She didn't want to burden him, especially now that they had started to rebuild what was once broken. So instead, she took it upon herself to meet the board's legal team, to sit through cold discussions about his intentions, his mental capacity, and whether their marriage was even authentic. She sat across from men and women who had known her husband for years, who had worked under him, profited beside him, and now questioned the legitimacy of his love story. They said things like, "It's clear this was an emotional decision," and "We believe your influence over him is concerning." She was insulted, heartbroken, but she never wavered. She knew this wasn't just about money. This was about power. Who had it, who feared losing it, and how love challenged all of it. But it wasn't until they issued a final demand, either relinquish all control of his company assets or agree to a shared leadership model, that she made a decision that shocked everyone. She signed the entire fortune back to him. Every cent, every share, every property, without asking for a single thing in return. She walked into his office one evening, placed the documents on his desk, and simply said, "I gave you back your fortune." His eyes widened, confused. "Why would you do that? You earned that trust. That was yours." She smiled gently, though her heart trembled. "That's exactly why. Because true love isn't about ownership. It's about freedom. And if you feel freer without that weight on me, then I want you to have it all. No strings, no expectations." It was in that moment, watching her willingly give up what so many others had fought to steal, that he realized he had misunderstood something fundamental about love. He had thought giving up his wealth proved he didn't care about it. But real love, the kind that transcends contracts and grand gestures, isn't about who gives what. It's about who's willing to let go. And she had just shown him that letting go could be more powerful than holding on. That twist shook the foundation of everything he believed about their relationship. He had been so focused on proving his love through sacrifice that he never stopped to think what she might need from him. Safety, space, and the freedom to love without always proving herself. Her gesture stripped away every insecurity he had left. It revealed not only her strength, but also his need to redefine what commitment meant. That night, under soft golden light, he took her hand and whispered, "I never wanted to own you. I just didn't know how to love you without trying to prove I deserved you." She kissed his hand gently and replied, "Then stop proving. Just be." The simplicity of her words broke him open in the best way. From that day forward, their relationship shifted. No more proving. No more grand gestures born of guilt or doubt. Just love. Quiet, deep, and equal. It was a twist not of betrayal or drama, but of realization. True love doesn't bind, it liberates. It doesn't demand, it understands. And for the first time in his life, he felt what it truly meant to be loved without needing to earn it. It didn't happen with champagne toasts or lavish press announcements. There was no red carpet, no news headlines shouting their reunion from rooftops. Instead, it happened on a quiet morning when the city was still sleeping, and the world hadn't yet asked for their attention. He had woken up to find her standing on the balcony of their small countryside villa, the one they had impulsively bought during a weekend road trip before the world knew his name or bank balance. She wore one of his oversized shirts, barefoot, holding a cup of tea, her hair untamed by brushes or expectations. He joined her silently, wrapping his arms around her from behind, and for a while, neither of them spoke. It had been a whirlwind. Lawsuits, accusations, heartbreaks, confessions, sacrifices, but in that stillness, they both knew. It was over. Not their love. The storm. The storm was finally over. They had survived it. Together. He had officially declined reinstatement as CEO and transferred leadership to someone he trusted deeply. He didn't want to run empires anymore. He wanted to build memories. She, on the other hand, had quietly launched a foundation using her own family wealth, supporting young women from modest backgrounds, women who had been judged by their appearances, underestimated by their zip codes, and silenced in boardrooms. And even though she never used his last name to get donors or headlines, the foundation exploded in popularity, not because of his legacy, but because of hers. Their decision to move out of the spotlight wasn't about hiding. It was about healing. They traveled, not to resorts, but to hidden gems. They went to bookstores in sleepy towns, shared meals at roadside diners, danced to music only they could hear. For once, time moved slowly, and they let it. They started to talk again. Not about finances or futures, but about childhood memories, embarrassing secrets, silly fears, and impossible dreams. They began to know each other beyond trauma and titles, beyond tests and twists. Then, one evening, as they lay beneath the stars on a picnic blanket behind their villa, he turned to her with a small velvet box, not a ring, but a tiny handcrafted compass. Inside it was engraved, "Wherever we go, as long as it's together." She teared up, not because of the gesture, but because he finally understood. Together was the only destination she ever needed. They decided to have a small vow renewal, just the two of them, barefoot by a lake. No officiants, no guests. Just promises. He promised never to hide behind wealth again. She promised never to run away from love again. They both promised to choose each other, every single day, in silence and in storms. The grand reveal wasn't that they got back together. It was how they did it. With less noise, more honesty. With fewer grand gestures, more small, intentional moments. They started a new life. Not as a billionaire and his wife, not as survivors of drama, but as two people who had seen the worst of each other, and still decided. You. Always you. And from that moment on, the past wasn't a burden. It was their foundation. They didn't erase it. They built on it. Brick by brick. Hand in hand. Hearts wide open. It was raining that afternoon. Not the kind that forced people to rush indoors, but the gentle kind that made everything feel softer, slower, more real. The gray clouds hung low over the mountains behind their villa, and the air smelled like earth and possibility. Inside the small sunroom, where she often read her favorite novels, they stood facing each other, hearts wide open. No masks, no wealth between them. Just raw, unfiltered truth. She had just returned from a trip to visit one of the girls her foundation helped get into college, and her eyes sparkled with a kind of fulfillment he had never seen before. He watched her, silent for a moment, realizing that the woman he had married had transformed into something even more extraordinary. Not because of anything he gave her, but because of everything she had found in herself. And yet, she still chose him. Not because he could provide, not because he was powerful, but because he was hers. He stepped closer, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the overwhelming flood of emotion he had long buried beneath control and pride. "You know," he said softly, "I once thought love had to come with proof. A house, a ring, a title. Some way to show the world I was enough." Her gaze didn't waver. "But the truth is," he continued, his voice cracking, "I've never felt more seen, more worthy, than in the quiet moments when you didn't ask for anything but me." She didn't interrupt. She let his words fall between them like the rain tapping gently on the glass. "I gave you my fortune thinking it would test you. But I see now. It only revealed me." Her eyes welled with tears, not of pain, but of relief. "I never needed the money," she whispered. "I only needed to know I wasn't alone in this." And in that single moment, between the rain, the silence, the pounding of two hearts daring to believe in each other again, they closed the distance. He wrapped her in his arms, pulling her close like he would never let go again. And maybe he wouldn't. Not because he feared losing her, but because he finally understood that real love, lasting love, wasn't about clinging, it was about choosing, over and over, even when it hurt, even when it got messy, even when there was no guarantee. They spent that evening curled up together. No plans, no distractions, just the warmth of shared blankets and shared breaths. They talked for hours, not about the past or the future, but about everything in between. He told her about the fears he never voiced, the nights he thought he had lost her forever, the guilt of ever making her feel like she had to prove her love. She told him about the days she doubted herself, questioned if she was enough for a man the world seemed to worship. They held each other through the confessions, through the laughter and the aching truths, and in the middle of all of it, he took her hand and said, "If I had to lose everything just to find this version of us, I would do it all over again." She smiled through her tears, resting her forehead against his. "We didn't fall in love because of the fortune. We survived in love in spite of it." That night, they danced in the rain. No music, no audience. Just two souls who had journeyed through storms, betrayal, and doubt, and had found each other waiting at the end of it all. The emotional climax wasn't a single moment, but a series of small ones, each layered with pain, healing, and rediscovery. The resolution wasn't about reclaiming wealth or status. It was about reclaiming the simple, powerful truth that love, true, enduring, soul-deep love, is never about what you can give materially, but what you can give of yourself. In that rain-soaked embrace, in the quiet promises whispered between heartbeats, they built something stronger than a fortune. They built a life. Together. Not defined by gold, but by grace. Not rooted in luxury, but in loyalty. Not powered by money, but by meaning. And that, above all, was their richest legacy. As the screen fades into a warm golden hue, we see them once more, not in ballrooms or behind grand gates, but on a quiet beach, barefoot, laughing, the sunset casting long shadows behind them. They had the world once, mansions, power, influence, but what mattered now was the hand in theirs, the silent vow in their eyes, and the quiet truth that echoed louder than any applause. They had chosen each other over everything, and in that choice, they had found everything that truly mattered. She once thought she needed proof of his love. He once thought he had to protect his worth. But in the end, all they needed was to surrender to something far deeper than fortune. Faith. And now, as the story gently closes, the question is no longer theirs. It's ours. In a world obsessed with wealth, where love is often measured in gifts and grand gestures, what would you choose? If the person standing before you had nothing but honesty in their heart, no status, no riches, just truth, would you still say yes? Would you walk away from comfort for connection? Would you risk it all to stand beside someone who sees your soul, not your salary? Because love, the real kind, isn't bought. It's proven. Not with diamonds, but with loyalty. Not with promises, but with presence. And as their story lingers in your mind, we leave you with just one question. Would you choose love over money? If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, what does real love mean to you? And remember, every heart has a story. Yours might be next. Subscribe to The Wealthy Heart for more powerful love stories like this. Because sometimes, the richest hearts aren't found in mansions. They're found in the moments money can't buy.